Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Disabled Lawyer and Plan. In this episode we have Audrey Ludwig from Suffolk Law Centre. Audrey is the head of legal services and a senior solicitor at Suffolk Law Centre and is a member of the Discrimination Law Association. She will be speaking at the annual conference in the next couple of weeks. If you check that out, Audrey, it's fantastic to have you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, Daniel.
No problem at all. Before we begin, for the benefit of people watching, I obviously have a speech impairment and Audrey has an hearing impairment. So we have two impairments that may not always be compatible. So if we repeat ourselves, it's because we are making visible adjustments to one another. Thank you.
Absolutely.
It's so good to have you. It really is. I always kick off this interview with a very hard question, a very wide question. What does disability mean to you, or what does being disabled mean to you?
Okay, that's a really interesting question. Okay, I wasn't born disabled, so it's something I've sort of become as I've gotten older. I have a number of disabilities, I think principally 3, though my prescription list is massive. But principally the hearing impairment I got in middle age, and it's apparently genetic. So I have 2 hearing aids and I lip read, but I have some hearing loss in both of my ears. I've been asthmatic since I was teenage and the asthma's gotten worse. So most of the time it's controlled, but sometimes it isn't, like yesterday. So I can be quite poorly with that. But I would say, interestingly enough, I think the most disabling condition I've got is anxiety and depression, which I've had since I was a teenager. And I've been treated for it on and off. I had good periods and bad periods. But I think that's probably the most disabling of those conditions, because that's the one that probably mostly has affected my day-to-day life, if you see what I mean. But I think there's another aspect to your question, because as a discrimination lawyer, disability has a hugely important aspect to my life, because a lot of the work I've done over my life has been to assert the right of disabled people to live in this society on a level playing field. So, you know, whilst personally, disability and illness, apart from the hearing impairment, but a lot of it's related to illness rather than the sort of disability that somebody else might experience, which is more sort of constant. Mine is more intermittent. I think disability for me has sort of got a professional significance and a campaigning significance and you know, and in some ways a human rights element to a values element to me. So there's a lot of different things interplaying.
Yes, disability is often complex, as you know, and there's different definitions, and it means different things to different people. So being disabled to one person is very different to another, and like you say, when impairments are or conditions are intermittent, identity isn't always a constant as well for some people. And that leads quite nicely into my next question, which is about what does disability pride mean here? We
Oh,
we are doing this campaign because July will be Disability Pride Month, and it will be a month where people talk about their pride as disabled people, but that can often vary.
mm.
What does it mean to you?
Okay, I'm going to be a little bit challenging here. In some ways, a lot of things around pride and that sort of thing, in the way that it's played out by a lot of organisations, is very performative. It's lots of flags and bells and whistles and lots of declarations of people's rights and stuff, but very little substance. And so I must admit, I have a very love-hate relationship with the concept of pride as an activity. For me, so I have a sort of, I understand why people want to do it. They want to show pride in being disabled, or they want to demonstrate they're there and they're not going anywhere, and you've got to deal with the situation. But at the same time, it doesn't resonate necessarily with me very much. I'd much prefer to see the energy that organizations, not campaigning groups like yourselves, but organizations, corporations and spending their equality, diversity and inclusion budget on practical stuff, things that will actually make long-term effect, rather than spending their time doing slogans on Twitter or having a little badge or whatever. So, you know, as I say, my view is that I'm not having disability is something that's just part of me. It's part of my whole being. So in that sense, I don't feel either pride or the opposite. I think as a campaigning thing, it can work for some people, but it doesn't resonate with me. As I say, my life is about getting substantive change, and I suppose disability pride comes when I see impact, genuine positive impact.
I understand what you're saying, particularly around the commercialization of pride, because it's often used as a marketing technique by corporate entities otherwise put very little thought into whatever community they're claiming to be proud of.
Yeah.
And in many ways, charities do it as well. I mean,
Yeah.
the association is doing a campaign for Pride Month. Well, we are proud all year round, but maybe we're guilty of that as well. But,
as I say, if it spurs some people, I tend to work on the principle that you can't please all of the people all the time. And, you know, the fact that I'm not that bothered about something doesn't mean that other people shouldn't do it or have it or whatever. I just, as I say, I'm probably not somebody who likes, I don't like flag days generally and those sorts of things. And so, you know, people can argue with me and they might have a point that I'm wrong, and I don't mind me being told I'm wrong. But as I say, I'd like to see the disability pay gap change rather than a flag day, if you see what I mean.
I understand perfectly. And but for me, I think where I feel like is the disabled community is very diverse. We all come from different backgrounds, and we have different diversities within the community. But we all deal with a condition or impairment that has an impact on us, and we deal with the social element or the social barriers that come with that. and we do what we can to lead independent lives and contribute to society and battle against the prejudice against us. And I think that's what I'm proud about most.
Yeah, I can completely get that. I think the danger is that people stop at the badges and the flags. They don't actually achieve the next steps,
Yeah.
etc. And I think that's where I struggle with it. I think, you know, everybody wants to feel proud about something, and also, to be honest, I think some of the messages around, you know, the disability pound, for example, are really, really strong. You know, the idea that we are, if we can get into places to buy stuff, we will buy stuff. And therefore, if you make it really hard for us to access those goods and services, then you're going to lose money to your competitors. I think those sorts of messages are quite telling. But, you know, as I say, the corporate washing, of these things is problematic. And as I say, it's not just corporations, it's public bodies, it's charities, it's loads of different organisations who are quite happy to send a tweet, but actually do something substantive for their employees or their customers or stuff. They can't go that far.
Absolutely. I know in your job you
Mm.
you achieve substantive change for people on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
You can you tell us a bit about your job and what you do?
Yeah, let me just give you some background. I'm a solicitor, but I sort of fell into doing discrimination law via doing a part-time job in a race equality council. And I set up a discrimination law practice and managed to get some funding to do all sorts of discrimination law casework for all protected characteristics, though we've ended up with about just under 50% of our work is for disabled people. And that's mostly on a self-referral basis. So it gives you an indication that one, disabled people are probably the most discriminated against, but secondly, people are not prepared to put up with it more, and they are prepared to challenge, which I think is more positive. So essentially, since 2008 until now, we've been providing, firstly at the Race Equality Council, and then when we set up Suffolk Law Centre out of the Race Equality Council, we've been running a discrimination law practice. And until recently, until earlier last year, I was full-time, working full-time as a discrimination lawyer, mostly in the employment tribunals, but a bit of county court goods and services work, and doing a whole range of cases for clients who were disabled with a variety of different disabilities, and people who were either because they'd lost their jobs because of discrimination, or they hadn't been employed because of discrimination, or they were struggling in work because of a failure to do reasonable adjustments. So, you know, really interesting variety of work.
Working in a law center is always rewarding. I think you know me quite well. I had a few years at Queen Mary Legal Advice Center, and I did a year at Acne Community Law Center, and
Yeah,
a bit of Cambridge Field. And it really is a rewarding role because you really are helping people to achieve a substantive change in their life.
yeah.
In my cases, it was usually social security cases. So
Mhm.
obviously, I'm helping people to attain financial support they wouldn't otherwise be able to access because the system it's trying to block them from accessing it. And when you can help people in such a big way, it's always so rewarding.
Absolutely. Some of my favourite cases are the ones where people are off sick because they haven't been given reasonable adjustments, and by our intervention they can go back to work. So for example, I was doing some work last year for a woman who is autistic, and she got a job in a shop, and she said she was very good at that job. She said she got the best product knowledge of all of the shop assistants, but she was really struggling in her job because they kept changing her shifts, and she needed a shift pattern which was regular, because she was getting very, very stressed out by her changing her shifts, and it was incompatible with her her neurodiversity. So anyway, we started with a grievance. That wasn't successful. We issued proceedings, and we ended up going to what's known as judicial mediation, which is an alternative form of settlement than going to a final hearing in employment tribunal. So it involves a judge, but it's more informal. And as a result of that, we managed to get all the reasonable adjustments she needed. We managed to get her some compensation and retraining of the national, the chain. All the managers in the chain were going to be given disability awareness and autism awareness training to ensure that they would understand the needs of people with neurodiversity. So this person has told me that only just over 20% of people with autism are in employment. And she said that she could never get another job because she can't go through interviews. So a disability scheme. So she really wanted to hang on to it, and she's still in employment in this shop. And I'm so proud that she's still in work, and we managed to sort it out. We could have gone to court and she'd probably got more compensation, but that's not what she wanted. She wanted her job. And so that sort of thing makes me very proud. I feel like if I can keep somebody in work that wants to be in work, if I can make their job easier for them, if I can help them reach their potential. Now, you know, for a couple of clients in my head I've dealt with, sometimes it's as simple as an organisation buying them a different chair or something like that, or putting them on the ground floor as opposed to, or giving them a parking space closest to the office. It's not necessarily expensive issues, but a lot of employers are not very good at understanding the legislation, and a lot of people, particularly line managers, are very poorly trained around what their duty is with regard to do reasonable adjustments. And we've had so many problems with people mixing up right to reasonable adjustments under the Equality Act and flexible working regulations, which you can only apply for once a year, and they can turn them down on business need and various other things. But loads of people have come back and said their requests for, say, reduced hours because of their disability have been turned down under the flexible working regulations. And we're saying, you know, but that's not what you're applying for. You're applying for disability related reasonable adjustment. So a lot of it is just basically a grievance letter or a form of re-education of employers to do the right thing.
Sometimes it's only a small amount of information that can make a big difference in somebody's situation. And I think that indicates or it shows how important legal advice centers are in helping people get over these barriers that will otherwise be a blockage to getting to where they need to be when somebody with your experience and your skills are able to help them do that.
Yeah, and also having gone through the access to work process myself, and also doing it as an employer for a couple of my colleagues, I can give clients first-hand information about access to work and stuff like that, which, you know, again, makes it more real. I can't say I'm saying very good things about access to work, but in practice, at least I can give people information and some understanding of how it operates.
You've mentioned a few things that you're proud of. If you haven't told me already, what has been the best experience of your career?
Oh gosh, I think setting up the law centre. Basically, if I can explain it, I was working for the Race Equality Council, and we started a few clinics for mostly for migrants who may not want to know how to access legal services, but just using volunteer lawyers from the local community. And because of the cuts to the legal aid, and also because other providers in our county were pulling out of legal aid, we were getting more and more people calling for help, and we couldn't help them. So, for example, between 2014 and 2019, we didn't have a single housing lawyer in the whole of the county of Suffolk, which is nearly 1 million people who didn't have a housing lawyer to represent them if they were being threatened with eviction. And it's not just housing, there's other subjects where there's still lack of provision. It's a real advice desert. So I started going to conferences and saying to people, it's not fair, we haven't got a law centre, you know, and I said out loud, first of all, at a conference that I set up, we need a law centre in Suffolk. I think I said it about 2012, 2013. But it wasn't until about 2015, 16 that I attracted the attention of some funders, and they were interested in giving me some seed funding. And I set up a group, and we campaigned and we fundraised, and we did lots of planning. And in 2018 March, we set up a Suffolk Law Centre, and we've now got two lawyers going into court representing people in housing who are being evicted or are being made, who've got homelessness decisions. And we've got a little family law department, we've got our discrimination law department, and we've got, you know, and we've got our law advice clinics as well, giving half an hour's free legal advice. So we've gone from about 10 volunteer lawyers to about 60 volunteer lawyers, and I've got a staff now of about 13, 14 people. It's a bit of a struggle financially, but every day we're open, people in Suffolk are being helped with their legal problems who couldn't afford lawyers otherwise, and I'm very proud of that.
You really do fantastic things.
Thank you.
The importance of law centres can't be underestimated, and particularly the amount of effort you put in to be able to build one from scratch.
Yeah.
That's a big achievement. Having achieved all that in your career, what would you say the biggest obstacles have been?
Apart from funding, I would say I think my health has been an obstacle, though even then I have to say that it's been an opportunity. I started off as a commercial litigator, and I did various jobs, and I had a nervous breakdown when I was in the late 90s, and I'd had previous health problems, but this one was quite a major breakdown. And whilst it was bad, and I wouldn't recommend, depression and anxiety is not something, it's not a lifestyle choice I would give recommendation to anybody. It gave me an opportunity to reflect on what I actually wanted to do with my life. And I ended up working for a disability charity doing welfare benefits appeals for very little money, but, you know, actually realizing that there was a whole world outside corporate law that I wasn't aware of, that actually, you know, and so I'm not saying, you know, that sounds sort of Damascene moment stuff. I'm not saying that the rest of the history has been absolutely great, and I've had more health problems since then, mental health problems. But I think that one, I think the opportunity to reflect on my life. I'm very lucky in many ways. I'm quite privileged compared to a lot of people, in the sense that the sort of safety nets I've got a very supportive husband, and you know, so we could afford for me to not work for a few months and that sort of thing. Those things are really good. You know, so I wouldn't say that I would never say that I'm a model that anybody else could emulate, is what I'm saying. But I have to say that my health issues have been a problem over my life. I've had quite a lot of time off work, but I think it's got me to this point, which is very important. And so I think it's a sort of mixed blessing. In terms of my hearing, the worst thing has been in court. I was in court with my old hearing aids, and oh gosh, what's it called? My brain's not working. The hearing loop didn't work, and the magistrates weren't prepared to give me any kind of support or anything. I consequently did tear them off a strip in correspondence, but I was really upset at the time that I wasn't representing my client very well because I couldn't hear what was being said. I've actually got much better hearing aids now, which don't rely on hearing loop, because you can't rely on, organisations don't keep their hearing loops serviced. So, you know, they don't know whether they're on or not. They're absolutely useless things. So my latest ones don't rely on a hearing loop. But it did really ram home to me how disabling life can be for other people, because, you know, my disabilities tend to not be as disabling in the same way as, say, your disabilities, in the sense of when I'm out and about, it's really only, you know, it's only in certain situations where my hearing becomes really problematic, but that was one of them. And I felt really, really hopeless and helpless and cross, basically. And I'm a discrimination lawyer, and I still was not standing up for myself in the way that I could, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I think when you're in this profession, it's sometimes more difficult to advocate for yourself than it is for
Yeah.
people. I've been accused once or twice of not advocating for myself like I want other people, but I do quite understand how that works. And I'm really pleased that you've been supported by your law centre and you have a good support around you. That's always okay. And I like the way I like how courts need to make sure that they're accessing the equipment, ensuring access are always working.
Yeah.
Because when not, it might be when it's needed most.
The annoying thing was that the clerks and the other admin in the court were blaming the security people, and of course security people from a different company were saying it's nothing to do with us. So I couldn't get, at the time, subsequently I challenged it, but at the time I couldn't get anybody to take responsibility for sorting out the problem. And that's a real, I mean, I think, you know, I get the impression from Twitter that other people's experience of court is just as bad. So, you know, I'm not the only one to experience it, but I'd have gone on Twitter. If I had been on Twitter at the time, I'd have gone on Twitter and complained a lot and made a lot of fuss, I think. But
And you'd be quite right, because you've had a fantastic career and you've achieved fantastic things with Suffolk and before. What advice would you give somebody who was interested in a career at a law centre?
what advice would I give somebody who's a career in the law centre? I think the answer is don't get reliant on having a career in the law centre. Unfortunately, sorry, that's not a, it's not a complete doom and gloom statement. Basically, the difficulty is that our funding is usually very short term project funding. So we often only get funding for 1, 2, 3 years. So I've got so many colleagues on short-term contracts. It's very difficult to build a career now. And I think that what I would say to people is, if you get a job at a law centre, and I do hope people do get jobs at law centre, make the most of them, but understand that they might be time limited. So don't feel like it's your own fault if funding runs out. So many of my colleagues whose projects have not funded anymore and have had to leave have been brilliant. So it's not them that's the problem, it's the vagaries of the funding situation, but they do take it personally and to heart, and that's really sad. I think on the other side of the coin, I actually think, particularly for disabled people, I think law centres are a fantastic place to practice law. I think that being able to be, as it were, having some kind of understanding of what your clients are going through is hugely beneficial to your clients, to have some rapport, to have some empathy. And it's not, in some ways, it's about us rather than about us lawyers doing stuff for the little people. We are all in the same boat. And I think that's very positive. I went to a hearing in Norwich at which the only non-disabled person, my client had been working for a disability charity. And so the only non-disabled person in the whole court was the judge, and sorting out reasonable adjustments for hearings was a nightmare. But in some ways that was a positive, that the employer was disabled, the witnesses were disabled, my client was disabled, I was disabled. It was really, really positive. I don't think you'll get many hearings like that. And, you know, so in some ways, that's a really positive situation. I love working in law centres. I think they're very interesting. We get a really, really diverse group of people. I think as an early career lawyer, you get no better experience, because we don't have huge departments, so that you end up as a lawyer doing peripheral work. You end up right at the centre, where you could be running quite complicated test cases at a very young age in your career. So I think that that's very positive. And I think that you get really, really good outcomes, if only because so many bad things happen to people, so many unlawful things happen to people. So you do get the positive outcomes when they happen, when we can make a difference. And it's really positive. So, you know, I like working in law centres. I think they're very supportive. I think they're great. I've probably got about 4 or 5 colleagues who are disabled in my law centre, and that's not unusual. You know, it was quite nice actually, because when we employed one of our paralegals, she'd never worked with somebody else with the same, both of them got cerebral palsy, because our practice manager's got cerebral palsy, and they were just like delighted. They got 2 people with the same disability working in the same organisation as a sort of little support mechanism for each other. So that in itself is lovely. So
I don't think I'm giving too much information away when I say I once had a case with a free representation unit where
yeah,
I was representing, if you will, a boy with cerebral palsy, and that was that was a nice dynamic for me,
yeah,
because, well, first of all, I'm able to understand the difficulties that a boy was facing. I had some understanding of the parents' difficulties.
yeah,
and it was just really heartwarming to be able to help a young boy with the same condition as me to be able to get the support we were entitled to, but we're being prevented from getting it by
Mm,
a difficult disability living allowance system.
mm,
And that will probably stay with me for a long time. And equally, I know it's silly and it may never happen, but at some point in my career, I end up on a case where I'm disabled, my professional client is disabled, my client is
mm.
disabled, and maybe the judge will be disabled. I think
Maybe,
that
yeah, that would be amazing. I think that's where we need to be aiming for. I mean, what I would say to that is, what a fantastic example for that young boy, that his lawyer had his disability and he could look up to his lawyer and see that could be his future. And whether that is his future or not, I just think that's brilliant, because, just in the sense of, you can't be what you can't see. You've got somebody who's, advocating for somebody who's, is professionally qualified. It gives so many brilliant messages for people who probably spent a lot of their childhood being restricted and being told that they're less than other people. So, that's phenomenal.
I mean, I actually never met the boy because his impairment made
Oh,
it difficult, but maybe I may have been able to change the perception of disabled people to his parents and them
yeah,
um,
absolutely.
and hopefully that might have an impact. Well, that will stay with me, so I understand where you're coming from.
Mm.
I think maybe we covered it already, but what would you like people to take away from your journey?
Oh, I suppose that journeys aren't linear, they're not straight A to B, and that certainly when you're young, this idea that somehow if you haven't achieved X by a certain age, you should just give up. My career has been haphazard at best. I've done bits from, I was in private practice, I was in local government, I was in charities. I've done all sorts of different types of work, all around the law, but not, not in the same way. Don't think anybody would describe my journey as being linear or meteoric by any stretch of the imagination. I've really been my most successful in my 50s. And I think that's something to, everything that's got me to this point has been learnt over the years. So I've picked up stuff from every job I've ever done. So that's, I suppose, also a learning point. Um, I think I could learn to have a bit more fun now and again. I think I'm quite serious a lot of the time, and I think maybe sometimes I work too hard on occasions, and that doesn't help me. But there's a bit of me that says that's part of my personality, and you know what I mean. It's like, I probably wouldn't be the person that I am today if I wasn't like that. And so, I overwork, I get ill, I have to take time out, but maybe that's just me, and I've not learnt the lessons of earlier in my life. What else would I say with lessons I should learn? I suppose just keep trying is also an element of it. It's like, I, I'm not an overnight success in anything. My academics are not great. I'm not a fantastic advocate. I'm not a fantastic manager or anything like that. I've got a passion for justice, and I think I have an ability to persuade other people to join me in that. So I've got some skills, but I'd never be the best lawyer in the world, but I don't think you need to be the best lawyer in the world to be a good lawyer. I think it's the match of skills and empathy and understanding practical solutions to things and those sorts of things, you know. I think a lot of people worry about what they never became, and they don't focus enough about what they did become. And I think that's something that's quite important. Do you know what I mean? I think the pressure, you know, to get the pupillage or to get the right chambers or to get the best cases or the, you know, the best trainee solicitorship, you know, I'm not saying it's easy. I mean, I think it's a lot harder than when I started out, and I wasn't conventionally disabled as such when I started, so I had a lot of advantages over somebody who has a disability, say from childhood or from birth. But I think at the same time, you know, I think we've all got challenges of different sorts, and in some ways, it's the issue in some ways is partly to get yourself into a mindset where you think, what do I actually want out of life? How am I going to achieve it? Because I think you've sometimes got to challenge yourself about what you want to achieve. Because I spent the first few years of my working life thinking I wanted to be a partner in a commercial firm doing commercial work and, you know, doing the conventional thing, and it wasn't me, and I wasn't very good at it, and it wasn't me, and being honest with yourself is probably a very good thing. I think the other thing is you've got to get over other people's perception of you, and that's a lot harder when you're visibly disabled or, you know, and in other ways, and I think that's a harder one to crack. But, you know, the disabled lawyers I've met are usually actually exceptional. You know what I mean? I mean, I met a guy, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, called Digby Johnson, who's a criminal solicitor in Nottingham.
I don't know him.
Oh, he's amazing. I met him years and years and years ago. He's got his own firm in Nottingham, and everybody raves about him. Now, you know, he's probably one of the best criminal solicitors there are, certainly in that area. The fact that he succeeded, you know, a few decades ago as a blind solicitor in criminal practice means he must be exceptional. So usually a lot of the disabled solicitors I've met, solicitors and barristers I've met, are usually exceptional, because they've gotten to the point they've got to. So they've usually got other qualities that hopefully somebody will recognise, and they will get those qualities, if that makes sense, you know, because they've gotten to where they've got with the situation they're in.
I really like the advice you're giving on all points you've made about being practical, about what you want to achieve, about being self-reflective about your journey and what you really want to get out of it. And I particularly like your support and admiration of disabled lawyers. That's me.
I think, you know, I mean, objectively, one has to be in admiration for somebody who's overcome difficulties that other people haven't got. I think, you know, as I say, the point about this is that if they've gotten to that point, they're usually exceptional in their intellect or their advocacy skills or their writing ability or some other reason why they've gotten to the point they've got to, and it usually comes out pretty quickly. One of the things I've learned as a discrimination lawyer is, you know, the danger of putting people in boxes. Yeah, now, you know, in some ways that people can say, but disabled people shouldn't have to be better than other people, that they should be allowed to be as average as other people. We haven't got to that point yet. We're still at the people have to be extra special, and you do have to recognize that, but also just try and persuade a lot more employers that if you've got somebody who's potentially wants a job, to actually recognize if they've gotten to that point with the skills they've got and they're showing those skills, in the interview or the test or whatever, then they must be particularly exceptional if they've got those disabilities. Yeah, we've got an office manager in our office who's got cerebral palsy, and she can't walk upstairs, so she's never seen the upstairs of our office. And we joke and we say there's a swimming pool up there and a bar and stuff. She's never seen it. But what we do is that we'll get a colleague to literally, if she's got to go, you know, if there's a problem with a piece of furniture upstairs or a radiator or something, we just film it with a phone, and then she sees the film and then she can deal with it accordingly. So she doesn't have to see the upstairs of our office to deal with it. And I think that's the point, is that it's just, you know, recognizing the fact that she's blooming brilliant at her job, and we're very lucky to have her. And the fact she can't walk upstairs is secondary, because we can help that out, you know, we can deal with that.
You know what, I think that's a good point to end the interview on. I think we've answered with almost the questions, and I don't think that's a fantastic way to end a brilliant interview with you. I can't thank you enough for coming on with Disabled Lawyer and Brown Campaign. We're very glad to have had you on here. For the people who don't know who I am, I'm the chair of the Association of Disabled Lawyers. We're running a Disabled Lawyer and Brown campaign to raise awareness of the issues in the legal profession, to raise the visibility of disabled lawyers, and to encourage disabled people to pursue careers in the legal sector. Thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you. Take care.